With the concrete foundation complete, we'll be paving it with yellow bricks on the top and charcoal pavers on the front of the steps. So we're going to be ripping 10 mil off these pavers to make them fit our stairs. I want to get a nice even coverage using my trowel. I'm taking my time with this process.
You come and go like a monsoon rain. You hide and show like a lightning bolt. You have it all.
The idea here was to continue what we started on the upper level of this hill. These were the leftover bricks, hollow block, split face that you saw in a previous series, and these yellow brick capping. We also had plenty of these yellow bricks left over, which ties into the existing brick part of the house, and incorporated this stairway that's cascading down this hillside.
In this episode, we're going to focus on the finishing elements of this staircase. With the concrete foundation complete, we'll be paving it with yellow bricks on the top and charcoal pavers on the front of the steps. The charcoal pavers are going to need to be trimmed on our wet saw to fit our steps. So I'm transporting them in on my wheelbarrow and setting them up right next to the wet saw, ready to be trimmed. I always try to be careful with handling my materials. Cement products like these pavers can scratch and chip and crack very easily. I don't have any spares for this particular colour, so I want to be careful with them. The factory size of these pavers is 200 by 400. Our steps are 190 high, so we're going to be ripping 10 mil off these pavers to make them fit our stairs. I'm using a stopping clamp on my wet saw, so by double checking the cuts come out exactly at 190, I know that all the other pavers will come out at 190. So after cutting all our pavers, I stack them on top of the wall conveniently so they're ready for installation. I'm bringing in the paving bricks we're going to be using for the stairs and also the top of this hollow block wall. These bricks are leftover materials from the previous project, so some of them are chipped and damaged. I just want to make sure we're going to have enough nice ones. So I'm going to wash and stack them neatly so they're close by for when we come to laying them. The last thing we have to do before sticking these pavers on the stairs is remove the formwork from the small stone walls around the blood orange tree. Often with these hardscape projects, they have to be constructed in a particular procedure because certain materials are laying on top of other materials. So we had to complete this small stone wall and the hollow block wall before we could do the stairs. By removing the formwork for these stone walls, I can double check that the stones come out as it should, so then we're ready to go on to the next step, which in this case is cladding the steps. I give all the stone a thorough wash down to make sure everything's come out okay. I also need the steps to be really clean for sticking these pavers onto them. I'm using a tile cement product to stick these pavers on our concrete. I want the mix to be stiff enough to be able to hold these pavers vertically and not slump. When I've adjusted the cement to the right consistency, we're ready to start sticking our pavers. I'm using plastic packers to get them to the right height and to also keep them level. I want to get a nice even coverage using my trowel on both surfaces, and then I'm going to use the trowel rake to scrape off the excess so we have a nice consistent thickness of material. I make sure my packers are positioned correctly, then push the paver firmly onto the concrete. I'm trying to get a nice firm fit. I use my hammer to tap any air bubbles out, and then I double check with my level to make sure it's vertical and sitting plumb. We use the paver we just laid as a reference to the second paver we're going to be putting on. I adjust the packers to make sure it's at the same height. I then repeat the process we used for the first paver by buttering both surfaces using my tile rake and setting it firmly onto the concrete foundation. By checking with my level, I can see it's slightly out of alignment, so I have to adjust my packers to get it plumb. I also make sure it's sitting on the same flatness as the previous one we laid, so they all line up. So they're all sitting on the same vertical plane. With our first two nicely in place, we move on to the next one, repeating the same process. I take my time adjusting these packers. I want to get it exactly plumb. After sticking this paver on, I use the back of my hammer to gently tap the air bubbles out and get it seated into the right position. We always double check with our level before we move on to the next paver. Whilst the cement's still soft, we can make adjustments with these pavers. So I'm just doing one last check on this step before we move on to the next step. The layout on the next step is going to be slightly different. We're offsetting the course of the bricks on the halfway point of the previously laid step. I'm using the square and tape measure to calculate the right cut point. So I'm going to have to make a custom cut in one of the bricks. It's going to be roughly half a brick width. Here you can see how I've laid out this half brick lined up with the halfway point of the previous step. I'm doing this as a design choice, so the staircase matches the hollow block wall next to it and behind it, which is laid out in an offset brick pattern. After being satisfied that this half brick's going to line up properly, we add our packers underneath so it can match the top of the step that I'm sticking it to. I then stick the pavers on the same way we did the previous course.
All around there's no one but you. Here, hold my heart. Stranger sound gets around us too. In between our sparks.
The end of this step gets finished off with a half brick, just like we started it. I measure it and custom cut one of the pavers so it'll fit neatly up against our stone wall. I clean off any spilt cement as I finish each step. I'm then continuing this process until we get to the bottom of our staircase.
I go red when you're sitting nearby. I'm like a young child. Oh, it's silly how time just flies when we play and you hide. You come and go like a monsoon rain. You had a show like a lightning bolt. You have it all.
The next day when this cement is all set up, we have to do a bit of tidying up before we move on to the next process. I've got to remove all the packers we used, and also I want to backfill some concrete along the edges next to our stone wall.
You had a show like a lightning bolt. You had a show. You had a show.
While we let this concrete set up on the staircase, we're going to move on to the natural stone wall. This is also a retaining wall that's going to contain the new garden bed. It wraps around a citrus tree that ties into the pathway that gives us ramp access to the upper and lower levels of this yard. This natural pink granite was a construction element we started in the previous terrace project. The retaining wall for this garden bed ties into our hollow block wall we constructed next to the staircase. We're going to construct the foundation for this wall using a single course of natural stone and backfilling it with concrete. I have to do a little excavation to make room for this foundation. The lump of dirt that's going to create the garden bed was dirt we removed in the previous terrace project, so it's all reclaimed dirt. We just need to excavate a channel around this to get our foundation started. I'm setting one of our largest stones in place next to the stone that we cemented into the hollow block wall. I'm setting the form up for this first course of stone using treated timber sleepers as they'll have the strength to keep the wall really flat when we backfill it with concrete. I'm incorporating the corner that turns back around the citrus tree. This will add a lot of engineering strength to the wall and help it hold back all this dirt. After checking the level, I make a slight adjustment by adding a packer. Now the retaining forms are ready for us to start adding stones. The goal with this first course of stone is to get them laid out flat up against our formwork. That's the side that's going to be exposed in the finished wall. I want them sitting tight next to each other. So to get them sitting tightly next to each other and flat up against the form, we have to do a little bit of digging in the dirt to get them seated right. I'm taking my time with this process as these stones are going to be exposed and they'll be setting the pattern for the rest of the wall. I'm adding a stake in the ground to help secure this formwork for when we pour concrete into it. With all our stones in place, we do a final wash down in preparation for the concrete. I do one last check of the stone pattern to make sure I've filled all the gaps, and then take a break and enjoy these chickens before we go on to add this concrete. Our first batch of concrete has a specialised mixture. We add bondcrete and also an extra shovel of mortar to make it extra sticky and help it penetrate between the cracks of the stones. I also add a sandstone pigment to it, so if it ends up exposed in the wall later, it doesn't look ugly like grey concrete does. I agitate all the concrete in between all the cracks of the stones. Then we continue to add more concrete. Once the coloured batch of concrete has been worked thoroughly into all the nooks and crannies, we start to add the standard grey concrete mix. The standard grey concrete will be hidden inside the wall. It's really part of the engineering aspect of this wall and purely for the strength of it to help hold up all this dirt. Now that we have enough volume of concrete in our form, we add some of the reinforced steel elements. Here I'm using an old piece of steel pipe, which will still have the same effect as using rebar. I continue to add concrete until we get this pour close to the top of our timber forms.
All around there's no one but you. Here, hold my heart. Stranger sound gets around us too. In between our sparks, you come and go like a monsoon rain. You had a show like a lightning bolt. You come and go like a monsoon rain. You had a show.
I add some recycled steel elements to help it bond into the layer we're going to be pouring later. On our next episode, we're going to let this concrete set up whilst we start the brick layout on the staircase.
I go red when you're sitting nearby. I'm like a young child. Oh, it's silly how time just flies when we play and you hide. You come and go like a monsoon rain. You had a show like a lightning bolt. You had it all. And there's no one but you, no one. There's no one but you, no one.
Thanks for joining me this week in my YouTube channel. Check the link below, and while you're at it, hit the subscribe button or make a comment so I can help you with your future construction solutions. And don't forget to follow our channel for more ideas and how-to tips for home and garden projects.